1 in 3 is intended for mature audiences. Episodes contain explicit content and may be triggering as they often include violence and other varying forms of abuse such as emotional, psychological, sexual, and physical. In most cases, names have been changed to protect all involved. Please note, statements and opinions of guests do not necessarily reflect those of my own. Co-parenting, and specifically high-conflict co-parenting in the context of post-separation abuse, are topics we're all becoming increasingly familiar with on this podcast. But the truth is, there's still so much more left to learn. Please welcome my guest joining me today, child psychologist Dr. Royster, who is here to help us dive deeper. Hi, Dr. Royster. Thank you so much for joining me today.
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Okay, so before we dive into our conversation, could you give a bit of a background just so the listeners can get to know you?
Yeah, well, so let's see. I'm in Colorado, and I'm a Wisconsin native. You and I talk about that a lot. Yeah, that's also why it's so easy to talk to both of us, I think.
Yes.
I have 2 kids, and we live and parent here in Colorado. We have for a long time. I'm a child psychologist. I have my own practice here in the Denver area. It's called Little House Psychology, an homage to Laura Ingalls Wilder, who started in Wisconsin as well.
That's right. Little House in the Big Woods. My daughter started reading that book.
Oh, yeah.
Like
Also,
just the other
when
day.
you go back and read them, you're a little bit like, ooh, this is problematic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, there's some problems. But I loved the books when I was little. And so that's where the practice name came from. And then I do therapy almost exclusively with children. That's my specialty. That's what I've always loved doing. And I work with a lot of kids from 2 homes. And so I see those children therapeutically. And then over time, I started to realize that there's this whole group of people, that moms in particular, that really struggle to know how to support their kids in that dynamic. And as the therapist, or as their psychologist, I was really limited with what I could and couldn't say, right? You really have to be very neutral. Mm-hmm. And so out of that came my second business, which is Learn with Little House. And that is a coaching business only for moms who are moving past or still in high conflict divorce, post-separation abuse, managing having their kiddos go in and out of these really toxic dynamics. And so I do a lot of work there, talking with moms about how, like, if I could be a little bug in your ear when a kid comes back and says something really off the wall to you, that's what I do in that business.
Okay, perfect. So
It's a very long introduction.
No, but that's exactly what we need here. So, okay. And I was looking at your profile, and then you had a few terms that I wasn't really sure. The difference between co-parenting, parallel parenting, and nesting.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is.
Okay, this is great. So I'm happy to talk about this. I would say that the gold standard for kids, what helps kids a lot post-divorce, is what we consider to be collaborative co-parenting. So that's kind of the gold standard. Basically, you can think of it as kids do worse when there's more conflict, right? Mm-hmm. So everybody's kind of trying to get to this really beautiful co-parenting dynamic, right? Where, you get along, you can stand by each other at the soccer game, and the police don't get called. You can generally text each other. You can talk to each other. You're not super worried about your co-parent, talking shit about you or sabotaging your relationship, right? This is definitely kind of the dynamic. Very business-like, is very collaborative as well. But I would say even friendly. Okay, so that's collaborative co-parenting. Anytime you hear somebody talk about that, they will tell you that took a lot of work. That took a lot of time. We still have our moments, right? Like if we could parent peacefully together, we might still be together, right? So that's kind of what people are working towards, and that's what the research tells us helps kids the most. On both, you can kind of think of that as the middle of the road. On both sides of that are parallel and nesting. Nesting is a term that we use for folks that it comes from bird nesting. Think of birds, right? Think of birds. The bird nest is the family home, and the kids stay there. And one parent flies, quote unquote, in and out of the house. So there's usually a separate house on the outside, like a small apartment or something, that the kids really never go to, but the parents transition in and out of the house. It works best when it's temporary. So in cities and places like where we live in Colorado, I assume also in Tennessee, houses are really expensive. The housing market's bananas. Even if you had the money to get a house would be hard. And so a lot of families use this while they're still tied up in divorce proceedings, right? If you're waiting to sell the house, or you're waiting for, I don't know, part of your settlement to help you purchase a second home, right? Like this kind of dynamic. As you can imagine, that requires a very high level of cooperation, right? Because if you got salty when he wouldn't unload the dishwasher before, imagine when you're not there and you come back from your apartment and the dishwasher's dirty, right? So it requires a pretty high level of cooperation. Okay. So that's kind of the nesting idea. Okay. Then at the far end of the other side of the continuum is what we call parallel parenting. Parallel parenting is, you want to think about it a little bit like a divided highway, right? Like an interstate. You're going one direction, your partner's going the other direction. You do not cross the median, right? What happens in our house is my own rules, my own punishments. It's not like if I take away the iPad at my place, I can expect the iPad to be taken away at the other house, right? Rules are separate, routines are separate. There's very little communication across the interstate, right? And typically, parallel parenting, it's very normal for folks to do parallel parenting before they can get to collaborative. And that's because there's a lot of healing and hurt, right? So along the grief process, that's pretty normal. And then you move towards that. But we also see it in situations where there was abuse, violence, where there's post-separation abuse, where there continues to be this really high conflict, very litigious, very intense relationship. Then we often recommend parallel parenting for everyone's sake. It's better for the courts, for the legal proceedings, and it's also better for usually the co-parent's own mental health, right? There's less crossing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, unfortunately, for probably a lot of the listeners, given this is a domestic violence podcast,
yes.
is that it's probably a combination of parallel parking, parallel parenting, with the abusive ex, like crossing that median and playing chicken with you.
Mm-hmm. You know, this is not my quote. I didn't come up with this, but I read somewhere that it's like co-parenting, quote unquote, whatever you want to call it, is one of the only dynamics where you're expected to stay in contact with your abuser. Mm-hmm. You have to. You have children, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes that person disappears, but often the types of folks that engage in abuse, narcissistic abuse, domestic violence, that type of abuse, are really interested in power and control. And having kids in the dynamic is like, I don't know, their fuel. Like they're not interested in what's best for their kids. They're interested in power and control over you. And the way they do that is through the kids.
Exactly. And that, I think, is where there's the potential for so many, I guess, mistakes that the victim parent can run into, because they're trying to advocate for their child or children. Mm-hmm. They're also trying to navigate this whole power struggle that's happening. And there's this fine line between advocating and becoming too aggressive to where the court system looks at that parent and thinks they're actually the controlling one, or they're actually the aggressive person.
Yes. And I think what gets really tricky too is in cases where it's it's more of a emotional or narcissistic abuse, that's very hard to prove. That's very hard to come out of, right? And so, and it's, you know, it's not as clear as something like physical abuse, where there's a CPS report, there's an injury, it's not debatable if it's happening or not. And the classic move is to say, well, she's just poisoning me against the kids, when moms are trying to talk about this kind of concern they have for their children's well-being.
Right. So what
I have
what do
so
you do?
many thoughts on this.
I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's
what
a
do you
big
do?
topic. It's a
And
scary topic.
it is. It's a scary topic for sure. And I've had a few people come on and talk about this in, from different points of view. But like, what do you, I don't think we can hear enough. Like, what do you do?
Yeah.
How do you, when you're getting your kids home and you realize that what's happening, you're doing that sort of parallel parenting, but what's happening at that other house is damaging or, not creating this stable environment for the kids to where they're emotionally healthy, they're adjusting well, or, even not taking on bad destructive behavior. How do you counteract, I guess?
Yeah. Well, and I think this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about why it's important to understand what lane that you're in. Because if you have a collaborative dynamic, if this is somebody you even have a business-like relationship with, or you're working really hard to assume the best of your co-parent, you're going to handle those situations different, right? Because you might know your kid is being a kid and trying to play you guys off of each other. So your kid might come back and say something like, well, dad says you're really stupid with money, right? If I'm in a collaborative dynamic, I may think to myself, or even just with my own kids, right? We're still together. We're partnered, right? I know that they wouldn't say that about me, right? So it's really easy for me to be like, well, I wonder what your dad was thinking when he said that. Or I'm pretty sure your dad doesn't think I'm stupid. If he said that, like whatever, right? You might address it. And then you might go to your co-parent and say, hey, look, they said you said this, and I know you would never say that. What do you think is going on here, right? Imagine that with someone toxic. And I'm using that term to encompass all of what this podcast kind of talks about. You would never, right? You wouldn't open yourself up to that. You, to your child, might be thinking, well, it's pretty likely they did hear that, and it's pretty likely they meant it, and now I have to offset this, right? So how do we manage that? Well, this is why there's whole other programs and systems. It takes a different set of skills. It really does. The first thing that we talk about all the time is documenting, having a very good system for how and what you're documenting. Because in these post-separation abuse dynamics, the list of what you're documenting is endless. So there's a strategy that I recommend folks work with their attorneys on around what is it we're trying to achieve? What is it I'm really trying to prove that they are consistently speaking poorly about me? Or I'm really trying to prove that trying to prove that they're inching closer and closer with transitions. They're getting earlier and earlier and earlier, right? Or I'm seeing a pattern of every time kiddo comes back from a long visit, we fall apart for 2 days. Whatever it might be, you're strategically documenting that, because otherwise you get super overwhelmed documenting everything. Okay, so there's that piece. And then there is support and coaching around what to say and what not to say to kids, right? Sometimes I work mostly with moms. Sometimes moms have read or it's been drilled into them to not say anything poorly or bad about their ex, right? And over time, the way that gets translated is, I just won't say anything. The kid comes back and they say that dad said I was stupid. I'm not supposed to say anything bad, so I don't say what I want to say, which is, no, he's stupid. And he's stupid for telling you that. Which, of course, you might think but not say, right?
Right.
And so you end up saying nothing. You say something like, oh, okay. And then move on, right?
Right.
But when kids' mental health is at play and when it really is like turning against you, you need to go a step beyond that. And you need to say something like, really appreciate you telling me that. What did that make you feel like when he was talking about me like that? Or, gosh, we don't call people stupid. That's kind of a hurtful thing to say to someone. You see how that's not talking badly about him at all. It isn't. I'm not saying he shouldn't be saying that to you. I'm saying, what did that feel like to hear that? And thanks for telling me. So it's that type of skill that we teach.
Okay, and that's also putting it on the kid to recognize their feelings and to understand that their feelings are validated and okay to feel.
Yeah. Because you also have to imagine in that dynamic, it's probably not safe for that kid to disagree with
Right.
that toxic person.
Right.
And that could be actual physical safety, but it could also be emotional safety. This is someone that will shame me or call me stupid or make my life hell if I say like, hey, I don't think mom's stupid, right? And it also speaks to your relationship with your child that they're coming back and sharing what they saw and felt, right?
Yeah, so our goal is always we want our kids to be well adjusted and stable.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
other than that, are there any other things that parents can do to make sure that they are helping their children develop to become emotionally secure? And
Yeah. Oh,
especially in these like really
my goodness.
diverse, chaotic environments.
There's so much. There's so much you can do. We have a whole like program on this, right? Because it's many, many small things. So part of it is teaching kids how to test reality themselves, right? How to look around and sort of discern. And this takes a lot of time. Younger kids kind of just believe what their parents say, right? It's very threatening to not believe that. But if you continue to help teach them how to discern and question and observe, over time, they do start to see things for what they are, right? So if you're doing that in a non-judgmental way that doesn't put them in the middle, that really helps. The best things moms can do has to do with, and this is a way oversimplified way of thinking of it, but controlling what they can control, right? So if you want to raise kids that speak their mind and share with you and think feelings are okay, then you are really encouraging those things in your own time, in your own lane of the highway, right? And you're continuing to try to support that with the other lane, but knowing that you can't, right?
Right. Right.
You can't text him and be like, listen, when she starts crying, you better say, it's okay to cry. Because he's not going to listen. He's not going to listen to that.
And probably do the exact opposite.
Exactly. But you can, when she comes back and she says, I started crying and I got in trouble for it, you can say things like, well, that's not okay. Sorry that happened to you.
Yeah.
It's always okay to cry. Right?
Right.
So you're reinforcing your values whenever you can.
So
I can see you thinking.
I
Yeah.
know. And then remember I was saying it's swirly. I have to like,
Well, and it is an oversimplified way. We're trying to distill like what I teach in 6 months. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So let's say parents are doing all of, these techniques, techniques. When is there any like warning signs or like red alert sign, or you don't want to get to a red alert, but any signs where you're thinking I might need to actually have my child go seek communication with somebody, not seek help, like
course.
that there's something wrong with them, but finding a third party for them to talk
Yep.
to.
Yeah, and we'll talk about some of the difficulties with that as well. The classics. So the first sign that I always talk to moms about is trusting your intuition. There really isn't anything more powerful. You know your kid best. If you're starting to be like, wow, we are way sadder for way longer, right? Or this now feels bigger than something I can manage myself. It's becoming less of a, they're mildly distressed and more like we're anxious all the time, right? Or we're getting depressed. With littler kids, we see really big behaviors. A very common one is separation anxiety. That is not really developmentally appropriate. There's periods when that's pretty typical, and lengths of time that it's pretty typical, right? So you're starting a new classroom and you're 4. It's pretty normal for that to take a couple weeks for you to adjust. But if we're now 3 months in and they're still pulling your screaming child off of you and they're saying, gosh, it takes her an hour to calm down, we're edging out of what I would consider pretty typical behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're watching for those outliers, right? Behaviors that are either more intense than they were or more frequent than they were, right? So maybe occasionally we had a hard time with transitions. That feels pretty typical. Now it's every time. Now it's even a transition from, I don't know, like inside to outside. We're going to go play inside, and that transition now melts us down, okay?
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of stuff you're watching for. The other big thing with kids is regressions. So it's just a fancy way of saying we had a skill and now we don't. So we were talking, now we're not. We were totally potty trained, now we're having accidents every night. I don't know. Well, I guess physical regressions, like we could ride a bike or we could walk and now we can't. That probably is more like a physical therapy kind of thing. But you're looking at like we used to be able to cope with things pretty well, and now we're really struggling. That's when you want to bring someone in. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what does one look for when they're
Yeah.
looking for somebody for their kids to talk to?
Yeah. So here's the thing. Here's the thing. Let me tell you.
Let me tell you.
You want somebody that is willing and has experience with divorce, and in particular with high conflict divorce. Those kinds of folks can be a little like unicorns. They're very hard to find. Speaking as a mental health professional, it's very, very litigious and very, very stressful to be involved in a case like that. And for those reasons, many mental health professionals will say no. Okay? It's very hard to find a therapist for your child in these situations. And that's even if you can get your co-parent to agree to it, which lots of times that's a whole other court involvement. So it can be really tricky. You do want someone with experience because you need them to know when someone is putting on a show for them, when a parent is trying to manipulate a child or gaslight a child. You need them to be able to see that, okay? And to not be easily influenced by the competing narratives. Speaking as someone who does this work, it is very hard to stay neutral and requires a lot of consultation and support from the mental health professional. And it's really tricky to find those folks. So that's what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. It's hard to find.
Well, and how do you do that? Because I feel like if there's, say, you're interviewing different people and you're saying, hey, I want you to be able to tell if, my ex is gaslighting my children or if they're manipulating. I guess that's kind of the same thing. But, how do you know if they're going, oh, yeah, I know how to do that. Is there anything to really understand if they truly know what they're talking about?
And their ability to disclose that information, right?
Right.
So the things you want to listen for is experience, right? So you want to ask, like, have you worked with cases like this before? What are your standard protocols? Like, how do you manage communicating with both of us? How do you manage, even just down to the intake process, right? If a therapist doesn't have both parents sign consents, that's concerning, right? If they're requesting that you do an intake together and you're like, well, look, that's not the kind of things we do. You might have to pay extra for that and not be well within, you're using someone's time. But you want someone that is like, well, how comfortable are you guys? Like, do you want to do it together or do you want to do it separate, right? So you're looking for experience, you're looking for their processes that are already in place, and then you're listening for strong boundaries. So if they
Okay.
can hold boundaries with people, that means they likely can also hold professional boundaries, right?
Okay.
And so oftentimes, like when I take a case like this, I will tell families, like, listen, I can't make custody recommendations in the role of a psychologist for your child. That's not my role. So don't be playing that game with me, basically, is how I say it. You don't need to convince me that she should never see her mom or she should never see her dad because it's not appropriate for me to say that. My job is to help her go back and forth between your two homes, not to judge your two homes, right?
Right.
There are other psychologists that do that. Like that is their job. That is
Right.
not my job. So you
Right.
want to hear things like that so you can be like, okay, if a child senses that in therapy they're being pulled to say something, they're being pulled to say who they like more, who they want to live with, you've destroyed the therapeutic relationship. It's no longer a safe place, right? How abuse works, how narcissistic abuse works, how children in these stressful environments get get kind of move through it, maybe that's the way to say it, is they do have their loyalties bounce, right? They still love someone that has hurt them. That's very common for children. You need someone that understands that, right?
So,
They need to have a strong trauma background as well. As I'm
yeah.
talking, I'm thinking about that too.
Yeah, yeah. And I think with all the players in that whole process, attorneys, everybody, you want somebody that is trauma informed, that is going to really understand the situation you're in. I'm totally going to put you on the spot here.
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Sorry. So I
We can
have
cut it out if it's terrible. So
That's true. That is true. If you hear a little pause here and it goes to something
it's
else,
because I answered poorly.
or you might have said like, I am not answering that
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
So I have a friend whose children were court mandated to go to a therapist, and sometimes I think the courts potentially will give an option. A lot of times these parents are going into the situation and they don't know who to look for or what to look for, and they're given a name by the court. Hey, this is somebody that we've used a
Yeah,
lot,
the
and they
attorneys know, which a
yes,
lot of
and
times those are good referrals because the attorney knows like this person is great. Right.
yes. I feel like this case probably was not, because I feel like this specific therapist was unfortunately manipulated by the abusive parent, and decisions that have been made since have directly impacted the kids. So what do you do in a situation like that where you can visibly see this is a very negative effect on my children? I mean, this got to a very big extreme that I can give you details later. I don't want to give
Yeah,
them
yeah, yeah, yeah.
publicly
Yes.
because I think it would be able
Yeah, it's
you'd be able to
private.
narrow it down to who it is. But what do you do if you're in a situation where it is a court mandated therapist and you are seeing that this interaction is very, very unhealthy for your children? Are there any actions, like can you petition for a second opinion, or how does that work?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things to think about here. I think the first is that you do want to check yourself, right? So it's really easy for folks in these cases to be like, well, that psychologist was a quack, or, like this person's just clearly unethical because you don't agree with what they said, right? So you do want to run it through that filter first, right? Is it just
Right.
like, I don't like this. I don't like what they're saying. It doesn't sound like that was the case here, but that is always a good thing to think about and to process with your own therapist too, of like, am I just getting triggered by my own trauma and my fears around what's going to happen to my kids is seeping into this? And yet there's a subjective person telling me like, no, that isn't happening. Right. So that's important to differentiate. In a situation like this, this is kind of a half answer, and I'm sorry. But
Hey,
the truth
I was
is,
expecting no answer.
yeah, no, the truth is this is an attorney question. This is something to ask your
Oh,
attorney
that's a good point. Yeah.
to really, and you may even just say and have your documentation in line. These are my concerns. This is my concern with what the therapist is saying. This is where it doesn't match up for me. Are there ways we can petition to have an evaluator come in or to have another therapist put on the case that we both agree with? I would also say that the way informed consent works is that, at least here in Colorado, if a parent, we call it pulling consent, but you sign all the forms, you do informed consent. If one parent in a case where I have two parents, if one parent says no, I stop treatment.
Okay.
I mean, legally, that's your right. That's what informed consent is as the consenting adult. And so if it's starting to go, you can always, and you can do this very respectfully. This person could just say like, listen, I have concerns. I want to just put a pin in this for a minute. And then on the back end, you're talking to your attorney about your concerns and what you can do. You may lose that case, right? The child may return to that therapist and continue work. But that is your right as a parent. That's what informed consent is, right?
Okay.
Does
Yeah,
that
and
make sense?
it does make sense. And
Yeah.
actually, it's like very good advice to go to your attorney because the last thing you want to do is start creating these waves, especially if you're in an ongoing, which in this case, they are in an ongoing custody dispute.
Yeah.
So you don't want to piss off anybody that is potentially making decisions for you
Right. And
or
you also courts do not look kindly on parents in these really litigious, high conflict situations standing in the way of therapy, right?
right.
Because courts are rightfully so worried about how the kid is doing. They're like, oh my God, these parents, right? Like, how's this poor kid handling it? Or they know the kid's struggling.
Right.
And so to be the parent that's like, I'm going to pause therapy, it's not a good look, right?
Okay.
It's not a good look unless you really have, you need to have good reason for that and definitely be speaking to your attorney before you do something
Okay.
like that.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
yeah, just because a court orders therapy does not mean, usually, sometimes it does, but you can have court mandated therapy. In this case, it sounds like the judge was saying, this kid needs therapy, let's get him in something, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I think
And
that's
you need to
how
be
it
making that
started.
happen. Yeah.
I think that's how it started. And I don't know if they said it has to be this therapist. And
Exactly. We don't know that part of the.
right.
It
Right.
is often the case that both parents will submit a couple names, and it's sort of like pick from one of these three, because they're keeping in mind that a therapist might be full, the hours might not work, the location might not
Right.
work, and the likelihood that these parents are going to agree on one person is low. So they usually give a couple options, but you don't know.
Okay.
We don't know with this case.
And then okay, so less heavy question.
Yeah,
So
I'm
if
ready
you
for
have
it.
multiple children, do you recommend if they are to go see a therapist, psychologist, do you think they go together or should it be individualized or do you just cater to the situation and the kids?
Oh, that's a great question. And like all great psychologists, I will respond with it depends.
I love it.
The classic response.
Yes, it depends.
I generally opt for different therapists. And I
Okay.
think that is because they're different people, different experiences. Sometimes with a sibling set that is really tight, or really close, or maybe I have an older child that's really parentified and supporting the younger one, or a younger child that wouldn't engage in therapy unless the older sibling was there, then we might get creative. But typically, a lot of times I like them to see therapists in the same practice, or sometimes even the same therapist, if ethically they can do that, because they know the family. And so there's less opportunities to be swayed.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a tricky thing. I mean, this is part of why I have the coaching program, is because I was getting a lot of parents calling me asking for therapy for their kids, because not always necessarily that they knew, kid was showing anxiety or some other big issue, but because they were like, we're in a high conflict situation. As much as I hate it, we are, and I can't find anybody to take them, and I can't, and my ex won't agree. So how do I help my kid if I can't get them in therapy?
Yeah.
And so that's where the coaching piece comes in, is because
Okay.
then I can be like, say this, do this, respond this way,
Yeah. So let's talk more about your coaching. Like how does it work? How do they get in touch with you? What happens once
Oh,
they
I
do get in
love
touch with you?
Yeah. Yeah. So Learn with Little House is a whole thing right now. We have a podcast, we have a masterclass people can take anytime. And then I also do like special topic masterclasses once a month. That typically is how people find me and sort of get a taste of how I talk and how I swear and what I talk about and that kind of thing.
You are from
Right?
Wisconsin after
I
all.
sure am, girl. I sure am. You can't really take it out of me as much as we try. I don't know that I would want that, but still. So they come in that way. And then there's a couple ways people can work and learn the skills. So we have some lower price point products, where like a high conflict communication boot camp. I'm working on like a tech bundle for FaceTime calls and all that business. There's a gaslighting class. So people can take things like that, which are more like passive. You watch the class, you get a workbook, you work through things. And then all the way up to our signature program, which is the Kids First co-parenting system. That's an intensive. So it's 6 months. It's only for moms. You get over 100 lessons that are taught by me on really common topics, right? So transitions and not putting kids in the middle, and how to talk to them when they come home and say something about you. And then there's weekly calls with the moms in the group and myself. And so you get that live coaching.
Okay.
Those are Wednesdays. I'll do that later today after we get off the phone. And that is what moms love. I think the call is like the real sauce of
Because
the
then they
program.
can come with a specific, like, this is exactly what's happening. What do I do?
Yeah. I mean, that's
Okay.
literally what we do. Like, what the CFI asked me this question. What do you think? We reviewed a CFI report recently. We've also talked about, like, how do I manage when FaceTime calls are being recorded, or these texts are coming through our family wizard, and like, I don't know what to do with it, talking parents, and all the way down to like the lovey that won't come back from dad's house, and what do we do about that? So we talk
Yeah.
about kind of anything people need, I guess.
And a huge age span too, it sounds like, right?
Yeah.
From
Yeah. So my specialty is young children. That's what I work with clinically most often. I am finding that there's a whole lot of concerns and problems with young kids post-divorce separation. And then it sort of ramps up again when they get to be teenagers and they start to get
yeah.
very independent and feisty.
Well, I think at that it's because, well, I don't know exactly why,
No,
but
tell
I
me.
think
Yeah.
part of it is because, the kids start to get old enough to where they can start recognizing what's going on. And they may not say it out loud, but just little comments here and there, you're thinking, oh, he or she gets it. But then when they get that teenage, I have a brand new teenager. He just turned 13.
They get it. They get it.
Yeah. But then they also have that teenage, I know everything already. So yeah,
Or
that
I
way I
get to
can see.
know all the adult details. And you're like, no, you don't. You're
Yes.
13. Like,
Yes.
you
Oh my
still don't get to know.
gosh. Oh gosh, he loves like Halloween and scary stuff. So he's already asking, can I download these podcasts? And I'm like, no.
No,
Well, I'm
no, you
13.
cannot.
I'm 13. I can't. I'm like, no, you cannot.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's literally like tomorrow I'm doing a masterclass on tech device and like tech usage and just how you handle when like then he goes to your
Oh,
co-parents' house and they say, "Sure, download them."
right.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's watch them together. Don't tell your mom.
I know. I love
I
that.
mean, this is my world. This is the
Yeah.
stuff that
Yeah.
but then in this scenario, you would be like, what do I say to that? Well, how do I
Right.
handle that? Right?
Right. I mean,
That's what I do.
when you're together and it's like, don't tell your mom, or if it's, grandparent, like, don't tell your mom I gave you all
Right.
this candy. Those are harmless situations, but yeah, it's a bit different when you get into the high conflict. Ooh, I had a question and it popped right out of my head.
It's okay. We're never short on things to talk about.
No,
You
I
and I.
know. Oh, do you have like a schedule? Like if people
Oh,
want to look at and say like, ooh, that's a
yeah.
master class I
So
want to take.
that's a good question. The best way to be in touch is I'm very active on Instagram, a little less active, but still active on Facebook. And then my website, learnwithlittlhouse.com. I update it all the time with kind of what's coming on. And after folks enroll or opt into something, then you're on my email list. And I send stuff out every week. Like, this is what's coming up. And the other thing is, I really love to hear from the community. So often my podcast or the classes are directly from the women in my Facebook group or the women in the program are like, we're really struggling with this. And I'm like, okay, I'll do that. I'll do a masterclass on that, or I'll do an episode on that
Okay.
to try to make it as useful as I can for the folks that are using it,
Right. So what are the handles? I'll include all those in the show notes too, but
Yeah, it's Learn with Little House. That's
okay.
everything. That's the
All the way
website,
across.
Facebook, YouTube, and then the podcast is called the Kids First Co-Parenting Podcast.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And
Yeah.
I'll have all those links. So,
Thank you. Thanks for
yes.
sharing those. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you coming on and sharing all of this wisdom.
This was such a deep conversation.
I know. Sorry.
I love it. I'm like so into it. Usually it's like, how do we protect kids through the divorce, which is so important. But my mom's, and I think the people listening to your podcast it's more intense than that.
It is.
know?
It's very, very intense. Do you think, is there anything we missed? I think we covered
I mean,
a lot.
you and I could talk for hours.
I know.
Truly.
I know.
Truly,
Seriously.
truly. But so yeah, I think there's probably a lot we missed, but nothing
Right.
that we need to include right now.
Okay. Okay. So wrapping up,
Wrapping up.
I think every voice has strength. So is there a specific strength or message that you would love for listeners to, like the lasting message for them to be left with?
Yeah. I really believe that it takes one person, right? We know kids who are horribly abused, horribly neglected, really, really awful situations. And it takes one person to really see you and value you, to build resiliency, right? And for them to be okay. And so I really want moms in these tough dynamics to know that, like, don't underestimate the power you have as your child's mother, but also just as that calm, steady, like attuned person that is saying, I may not be able to change all this crazy around you, but I can look you in the eyes and I can hold you emotionally and physically, right? And we're going to be okay. We're going to figure it out, right?
I love that. I think so many people probably needed to hear that.
Yes. You can just picture me whispering it in your ear all the time.
Yes, on repeat.
You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay.
Okay, well, Dr. Royster, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This is delightful.
It was.
I'm going to have you on Kids First very soon.
Yes, I am excited. I will definitely do that.
Yeah, I'm going to schedule you like right after this.
Okay.
All right, my friend. We'll talk soon.
Okay, yes, absolutely.
All right, take care.
Thank you again, Dr. Royster, for joining me today, and thank you, Warriors, for listening. I've included the links Dr. Royster was referring to, as well as her 1 in 3 profile in the show notes. I will be back next week with another episode for you. Until then, stay strong, and wherever you are in your journey, always remember, you are not alone. Find more information, register as a guest, or leave a review by going to the website 1in3podcast.com. That's the number 1, IN, the number 3, podcast.com. Follow 1 in 3 on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at 1 in 3 podcast. To help me out, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. 1 in 3 is a .5 Pinoy production. Music written and performed by Tim Crow.